Hi everyone, and welcome back to this series on how I became a TEFL teacher and my story and how I got into the business. In the last video I talked about my beginnings in TEFL in Spain and doing my CELTA, and explained how I lived in Spain and how I sort of got started in teaching. So in this video I'll talk about my sort of next step, which was to go to Korea, and my first job for the British Council. In November 2011 I moved to Korea, to Seoul, South Korea, to work for the British Council, to teach there. And that was a big move, a big transition for me. I'd never been to Asia before. I'd never travelled outside Europe, I don't think, up to that point. So it was it was taking the plunge. It was a big move. So I remember going up to the airport, Bristol Airport, which is about 20 minutes from my parents' house, and getting the plane from Bristol to Amsterdam. So a small propeller plane, early in the morning, and waiting around at Schiphol Airport for a couple of hours, and then getting the connecting flight to Seoul. And I was very excited because it was a jumbo jet, 747, Boeing 747, which I'd never been on before, and I'd always wanted to fly on. So I was very excited about that. So, and then, obviously the longest flight I'd ever been on, something like 11 hours, 12 hours. Arrived in Seoul and couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe how cold it was. This was November, so it was the time, I think, about -15 when I landed, which I couldn't believe. I thought, I'm going to Asia, this will be warm. And I couldn't believe it. It was -15 or something, freezing cold. And I could feel that coming out of the aeroplane. I could feel how cold it was outside. I could see on the ground the ice, and snow, and stuff. And of course, me being me, I hadn't really done any research before. Didn't quite know how cold it would be. So it was a bit of a shock, but made my way through the terminal, picked up my stuff, and came out of the arrivals gate, and lo and behold, there was a guy there with a sign with my name on it. Sign saying British Council, Nicola Simpson, and I couldn't believe it. So they'd sent a driver to pick me up at the airport. Again, first time that had ever happened. So he took me to his limo, which was just outside the terminal. Incredible. A TEFL teacher in a limo. Who would have thought it? Got into the limo, drove out through Incheon, out of the airport, into Seoul. I have to say, my initial impressions of the area, Korea, or Incheon, were not great. It was very grey. The buildings were grey, the sky was grey because it was the sort of depths of winter. The road, the tarmac was grey, the bridge, the concrete there, all the buildings. I felt like it was some sort of dystopian, future or something. These huge, tall apartment buildings, but they all look the same. They're the same height and all the same design, almost sort of like Soviet style, Anyway, so we drove past loads of those, across the sort of bay there in Incheon, and into Seoul. And driving through Seoul, obviously lots of traffic, and I just spent my time looking out the window, kind of dazed because I'd been on a long flight and I was tired. And we came to the hotel, and again, great. I mean, downtown, 5-star hotel, nice room. They had a free bar on the sort of, it was the 10th floor or something like that. Incredible. Again, a TEFL teacher in a limo in a 5-star hotel. I've been used to 800 euros a month and living, sharing a house and, camping and things like that. This was great. This is an amazing thing. So, checked into the hotel, great. And they put me up there and, went around, had a look around the neighborhood. Just remember that my initial feeling was just how different the place was, and I felt, like I really was in a foreign country. I was somewhere totally new, totally different, not like Europe, not like, anywhere I'd ever been before. It was unique, and the main thing that struck me was the monocultural, sort of racial aspect of being used to places like London where there's people from many different countries walking around. Korea, when you get there, you don't notice that so much. Most people are Korean. So that took a while to adjust to. So then I went to my first day of teaching, which was a couple of days later. I did all the stuff in between. They sort of help you to get flats and apartments sorted out and do your tax and paperwork and things like that. So, and you have a sort of induction at work and things like that, and they show you around and they tell you about the courses you'll be teaching, and they explain to you about things like how Korean learners are different from other kinds of learners and things like that. So I went through all that in my first week or so of teaching, which is, fine. And got into that, so taught there for a year or so, and then I moved to another centre, different British Council centre in another part of Seoul, which was a bit smaller, with something like 10 teachers, and that was nice. Maybe a bit more sort of down to earth, a bit more relaxed, fewer teachers, a bit less sort of stressful, less corporate. That's one thing you notice perhaps when you first start working in a British Council teaching centre, the fact that it's basically like an office. If you've been used to teaching in a small teaching centre or school in, Europe or whatever, and it's quite informal there, and it's kind of a bit fun, less serious perhaps. When you get to a British Council teaching centre, probably your first impression will be that it's a serious place. It looks like an office, not a school. Partly because of the fact you've got different departments all working alongside each other in the same place. You've got finance department, and you've got the arts department, and you've got the obviously got the teaching centre, you've got the exams department. They're all sort of working together. Most of those guys do work in an office scenario. They're not teachers, so it just happened to all be alongside each other in an open plan place, so it makes it feel kind of corporate. And you've got the branding everywhere, British Council logos and things like that. So that was my first impression, that it felt serious and people were busy and all working at their computers not as welcoming as I kind of expected, but I was kind of unfazed by that. But it was nice to move to a smaller centre eventually, where it was a bit more friendly, a bit more personal. So I stayed there for a while, and then I taught away there, kids, adults, exam classes, mix of different things really. And then after that, can I talk about that? So after that I kind of moved to basically what happened at the British Council is they split. We used to teach both kids and adults, and then at one point, I think it was about 2014, we split. So teachers had to choose whether they wanted to teach adults or kids. So I went down the adults route, and again moved to another centre in Gangnam, which you might have heard of, the famous song Gangnam Style, which that came out while I was in Korea, and I remember it being kind of people back home in the UK saying, "Oh yeah, Gangnam, right? Have you seen this Gangnam Style? You're in Korea, you must know about this." And I think that was sort of the first connection people had made between Korea and me, and the first I don't know, song or Korean culture they'd seen, and it so happened to come out while I was there. So I moved to this center in Gangnam, in the center of Seoul, and it was very interesting. Gangnam is a big commercial area. It's the sort of posh part of Seoul. So the school, the teaching centre there was sort of strategically located for that reason there, to try and get the sort of more well-off students in the area. And so that was interesting. We had a good range of different kinds of students, but it was interesting to see that a lot of the people who came to that particular school did. So I think because of the kind of prestige of the area, I think they wanted to be able to say they were studying in Gangnam. It's got for Koreans, Gangnam has a certain cachet. It's not sure what to compare it to in, say, London, but it's got a good the reputation is there, and if you say that you live there or you work there or whatever, that puts you up a couple of notches or a couple of steps in most people's estimation. So that was interesting. We had a lot of kind of fairly wealthy students, and that kind of thing. It was good to be in that area as well. A lot going on around there. So after work there was lots to do and lots of places to go out to eat and drink and things like that. So that was great. And while I was there, I did my Delta. So in the first video I talked about the CELTA certificate that I did in Madrid. The Delta is the diploma, so it's kind of like the next step in the qualifications, TEFL qualifications. So Delta is Diploma of English Language Teaching to Adults. So I did that while I was teaching at Gangnam, the Gangnam Center in Seoul, and that was hard work because I had to commute from my parents-in-law's house outside Seoul. So we were living there, I mean, my wife and I, for my wife's Korean, by the way, and so we were living there, and it was about an hour and a half commute each way. Their house is just outside, well, I say just outside Seoul. It's outside Seoul. It takes about an hour and a half to get into the city centre, especially at rush hour. So I used to have 7 a.m. classes in Korea. People would pay to come and learn English at 7 o'clock in the morning before they started work. So I would have to get up at 5 o'clock, maybe earlier, have something to eat, get ready, commute for an hour and a half, arrive at the office at 6:30, 6:45, get my stuff together and teach a lesson. I think it was a 2-hour lesson at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then I would have other lessons throughout the day, and I was doing my Delta all at the same time. So it was extremely hard work and tiring, but I think I probably learned the most. I had, sort of, that's where I picked up the most in my teaching. I improved the most by doing that, just by constantly having to teach, constantly having to think about teaching, doing all the assignments, and really applying the theory and stuff in the lessons I was teaching. So that I would recommend probably doing that to anybody who's serious about teaching and TEFL and teaching English. It will be the making of you as a teacher if you decide to do it. And it's probably worth it. It's horrible at the time. Everybody says it's horrible, and they're right. It's hard, but once you get through the other side, you'll kind of appreciate how worthwhile it is to do. So I did that, and then I carried on teaching there for a while. But at that point, I was starting to get a little bit sick of Korea, to be honest. The environment, the air quality was constantly deteriorating. When I arrived in 2011, it wasn't too bad, or at least it wasn't as noticeable. By the time it got round to 2016, 5 years later, the air quality was awful. People were wearing masks. There were alerts, government alerts, and text messages on the TV not to go outside for certain, older people or kids, and constantly in the news about how bad the air was. These long commutes were tiring, and they were getting to me, and I kind of had enough of living in a huge city, or of that scale. So I was starting to look for the next opportunity, the next destination. And again, as I mentioned in the first video, the first place to go for that is the British Council Jobs Board or Jobs website, where you have the list of jobs which are available. So that's the first thing I did. I went there, looked down the list, and I saw Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And it caught my eye, and again, applied for the job and got the job as a teacher in KL. So in my next video, I will carry on and explain to you how Malaysia was and how it was different to Korea. And if there's anything you'd like to specifically know, maybe how the students are different, how the lifestyle or the cost of living or anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of detail I could go into about these different places. If there's anything specific you want to know about any of them, let me know. Put a comment below, and I'll kind of address that in another video. Okay, so in my next video, I'll talk about KL and Kuala Lumpur and the next move that we made after living in Seoul or leaving Seoul. Okay, again, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.